Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. Owning a restaurant was supposed to be a dream come true. I built it from the ground up, worked ridiculous hours, poured everything into it so Rachel and I could have a comfortable life. I thought we were a team, but somewhere along the way, I became the one holding everything together while she got to enjoy the ride. At first, I didn't notice the shift. Rachel had always been social, always good with people. She'd stop by the restaurant a few times a week, talk to customers, keep the staff on their toes. It felt like she was invested, like she cared about what we had built together. Then Paul came along. I hired him as the new general manager, hoping to lighten my workload. He was sharp, experienced, said all the right things. He took initiative, made improvements, helped me reorganize the operations. I trusted him. And Rachel? She seemed to like him too. A little too much. It started with small things. Rachel showing up more often, lingering in conversations with Paul long after I had walked away. Then it became late nights. Paul and I are just going over inventory, she'd say, or I'm helping with the new menu ideas. At first, I'd appreciated her involvement, but something fell off. I ignored it, brushed it aside, told myself I was being paranoid. But deep down, the unease settled in my gut like a stone. The breaking point came at a family gathering. We were at Rachel's parents' house, a big backyard barbecue with relatives and friends. I was standing by the grill, making small talk with her father, when I heard Rachel's voice carry across the yard. "Ethan's been so stressed lately," she said, laughing lightly. "I swear, sometimes I think he cares more about that restaurant than me." A few people chuckled. I clenched my jaw, but said nothing. Her best friend, Megan, smirked. "Well, at least you have Paul to help out, right? You talk about him more than your husband." Rachel laughed again, too loud, too casual. "Oh, please, Paul actually listens when I talk." The words hit me like a slap. The laughter that followed only made it worse. I turned, locking eyes with her. She looked back at me, the amusement in her expression fading just slightly before she took another sip of wine like nothing had happened. I swallowed hard and forced a smile at her father before setting down the spatula. "Excuse me," I muttered, walking away from the grill. I needed a minute. I walked through the house, past the familiar family pictures lining the walls, into the guest bathroom. Locking the door behind me, I gripped the sink and stared at my reflection. Had she really just said that? Had she really just laughed about it in front of everyone? My stomach churned. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a joke. But that unease, the one I had been trying to ignore, twisted deeper. Rachel didn't respect me. And if I was finally seeing that now, how long had it been true? I barely spoke to Rachel on the drive home. She, of course, didn't seem to notice or didn't care. She scrolled through her phone, humming along to a song on the radio, acting as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just mocked me in front of her entire family. As if she hadn't made me look like some pathetic husband desperately clinging to a business that she barely acknowledged. I gripped the steering wheel a little too tight. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask her if she even realized how much she had humiliated me. But I already knew what she would say. "You're being sensitive, Ethan. It was just a joke. Why do you always take things so seriously?" It was the same cycle, the same dismissal, the same feeling of being unheard. So I stayed quiet. The moment we got home, she disappeared upstairs, muttering something about taking a shower. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the darkened window above the sink, my reflection staring back at me. I felt ridiculous, weak, like some fool who had spent years convincing himself that his wife still saw him as someone worth loving. But the truth was sinking in, and no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. The next morning, Rachel left early, saying she had errands to run before heading to the restaurant. I watched her from the living room window as she backed out of the driveway, my mind racing. I should have been at the restaurant already, but I needed time to think. I needed to understand what was happening. By noon, I finally drove in, parking in my usual spot in the back lot. The place was busy, the lunch rush in full swing. As I walked in, Paul was already in the dining area, chatting with one of the servers, flashing that easy grin that made him so damn likable. "Boss," he greeted, giving me a nod. "Perfect timing. Got a few things to go over with you when you get a sec." I forced a polite smile. Sure. Give me a few minutes. I made my way through the restaurant, greeting staff, checking on orders, making sure things were running smoothly. But my mind wasn't on work. It was on Rachel. Where is she? I found her in my office. With Paul. The door was slightly open, and I could hear them talking. Rachel was laughing, that soft, teasing laugh she used when she wanted attention. I stood there for a moment, just listening. Ethan's been all moody since last night, she was saying. I swear, sometimes he takes things so seriously. Paul chuckled. He's got a lot on his plate. But hey, if he ever wants to step back, you and I could probably run this place just fine. Rachel didn't respond right away. Then, after a pause, she said, maybe. Something in me snapped. I pushed open the door. Rachel jumped, spinning around to face me, eyes wide. Paul straightened, but didn't look the least bit guilty. Ethan, Rachel said, her voice a little too bright. I don't care. I cut in, my voice colder than I expected. I looked at Paul. You said you had something to go over with me? He hesitated, glancing at Rachel. Then he nodded. Yeah, let's step outside. I didn't bother looking at her as I turned and walked out. Paul followed, leading me toward the kitchen. He launched into some update about inventory, but I barely heard a word. I nodded at the right moments, gave short responses, pretended to listen. But my mind was somewhere else. That pause, that maybe, it wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to confirm what I had been trying to ignore. Rachel didn't see me as her husband anymore. She saw me as an obstacle. That night, I lay awake in bed while Rachel slept soundly beside me. The house was quiet. The only sound was the occasional hum of the air conditioning. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. I needed to know the truth. The next morning, I left early, telling Rachel I had a meeting with suppliers. Instead, I drove to a small electronics store across town. 30 minutes later, I walked out with a new security camera, one small enough to fit discreetly in the corner of my office. If she was sneaking around with Paul, I was going to catch her. And when I did, there would be no excuses, no dismissive laughs, no telling me I was overreacting. This time, the truth wouldn't be ignored. I installed the camera that same afternoon. It was a small, discreet device, barely noticeable against the dark wood of my office bookshelf. The placement was perfect, just enough to capture the entire room, including my desk and the seating area. If Rachel and Paul were up to something, I'd know soon enough. By the time I finished, the restaurant had emptied out from the lunch rush, the hum of conversation replaced by the clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen. I walked out of my office, scanning the floor for Rachel. She wasn't at the bar, not in the dining area, not helping in the kitchen. Then I spotted her, leaning against the back wall near the storage room, her phone in hand, smiling at something. Paul stood beside her. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way she tilted her head, the way he leaned in just slightly, it sent something sharp through my chest. Rachel glanced up, spotting me, and for just a second I saw it. The flicker of hesitation. The way she stiffened slightly before forcing a bright, casual expression. Hey, she said, slipping her phone into her pocket. Did you finish your meeting? I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Yeah. Paul gave me an easy grin, too confident for my liking. Everything good? Great. My voice was steady, controlled. I wasn't going to let them see anything yet. Rachel brushed her hair back, glancing at the time. I'm going to head out a little early. I have some things to take care of before dinner. I nodded, watching as she grabbed her bag from behind the counter. She kissed me on the cheek, a quick, absent gesture, and left without looking back. Paul lingered a few moments longer before finally heading back to the office. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. The camera was running now. All I had to do was wait. That night, I sat in the dark in my home office, my laptop open, the security feed playing. I fast-forwarded through the footage, scanning for anything unusual. At first, it was just business as usual, staff coming in and out, me sitting at my desk earlier in the day. But then, around 10:45 p.m., Rachel walked in. Alone. She closed the office door behind her, pacing slightly before pulling out her phone. A minute later, Paul walked in. I sat forward, my pulse hammering in my ears. Rachel leaned against my desk as Paul moved closer. The camera didn't have audio, but I didn't need it. The way she looked at him, the way he touched her waist before pulling her in, It was all there, clear as day. They kissed. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Rachel sat on my desk, her hands running through Paul's hair as he pulled her closer. My office, the place I had built, where I had spent years working to create something for us. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. I had my answer. The betrayal sank in slowly, settling like a heavy weight in my chest. I had suspected. I had known deep down. But seeing it, watching the proof unfold on the screen, it was different. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was reality. I forced myself to stay composed. I couldn't confront her yet, not without making sure I had control of the situation. Instead, I transferred the footage to a secure drive. Then I waited. Rachel came home late that night, slipping into bed beside me as if nothing had happened. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her breathing. My wife, the woman I had loved for years, lying beside me, carrying secrets I now fully understood. The next morning, I acted normal. I kissed her goodbye as she left for the restaurant, told her I'd be in later. As soon as she was gone, I called my lawyer. "Ethan," he greeted. "Everything okay?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I need to talk about filing for divorce." There was a pause. "Then, come in this afternoon." I hung up, feeling the finality of it settle in my bones. But I wasn't done yet. Rachel thought she was in control. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I sat in my lawyer's office, the weight of my decision settling over me like a lead blanket. The walls were lined with thick books, the kind that held laws and precedents, none of which I ever thought I'd need. Yet here I was discussing how to untangle a life I had spent years building with a woman who had been dismantling it behind my back. My lawyer, Mark, leaned back in his chair, skimming the notes I had given him. "You have solid evidence. The security footage alone is enough to establish infidelity, which works in your favor during the divorce proceedings." He glanced up at me. "How do you want to handle this?" I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. I wanted to blindside her. I want her to have no way to manipulate this, no way to spin the narrative in her favor. Mark nodded. "Then we do this carefully. No confrontations yet. We serve her when she least expects it, cut off her access to financial assets, and make sure you control the conversation." I clenched my jaw. "And the restaurant?" He tapped his pen against the desk. "That's a trickier situation. If she's involved in operations, she might try to claim some kind of financial stake. We'll need to prove she was never formally on payroll, just a bystander. I already knew she'd fight for money. Rachel liked comfort. She liked control. I wasn't about to let her walk away with either. I shook his hand before leaving, feeling a strange sense of clarity settle in. I had spent months, maybe years, convincing myself that my marriage was something worth saving. That Rachel was still the woman I had fallen in love with. But she wasn't. The moment I watched her with Paul in my office, any illusions I had left shattered completely. Now, it was just about making sure she faced the consequences. That night, I set the final pieces of my plan in motion. I transferred money into a private account, ensuring that if Rachel tried to pull anything, she'd find nothing left to take. Then, I had our accountant remove her name from anything tied to the restaurant, leaving no loophole for her to exploit. I even called our landlord, confirming that my name was the only one on the lease. When the time came, she wouldn't have a leg to stand on. Then, I made a call I never expected to make. "Hey, Ethan," a quiet voice answered. It was Mason, one of my line cooks. He sounded hesitant. "Mason," I said, getting straight to the point. "I need you to do something for me." A pause. Then, "Okay." I knew Mason had been the one who sent the anonymous email. The footage had come from someone inside, someone who had seen what was happening and decided I deserved to know. "I need you to make sure everyone is at the restaurant tomorrow morning before we open," I said. "Staff meeting. Non-negotiable." Another pause. Then, "You're going to tell them, aren't you?" I didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "They deserve to know." Mason let out a slow breath. "I'll make sure they're there." The next morning, I walked into my restaurant like a man with nothing to lose. The entire staff was gathered near the bar, their voices low, their expressions uncertain. Rachel stood among them, looking around in confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, forcing a light chuckle. Ethan, what's with the dramatic staff meeting? I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. I have something to share with all of you. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the security footage, and hit play. The room went dead silent. Rachel's face drained of color as the grainy footage played out on the screen. The way she leaned into Paul, the way he touched her, the way they kissed in my office. There was no sound, but the evidence didn't need audio. It spoke for itself. Murmurs spread through the room. A few people looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared in stunned disbelief. Rachel sucked in a sharp breath. Ethan, I held up a hand, silencing her. You spent months lying to me. You laughed about me behind my back. And then you had the audacity to bring him into my business, into my office, and act like I was too stupid to notice. Paul took a step back, looking for an exit. I turned to him, my voice low and firm. You're fired. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, glancing at Rachel like she might save him. She didn't. She was too busy staring at me, her eyes wide with something between panic and disbelief. Ethan, please, let's talk about this privately, she said, her voice shaking. No, I said, tucking my phone back into my pocket. You made this public the second you decided to do this in my business. Rachel's hands trembled as she looked around, realizing the weight of the moment. Realizing that, for the first time, she wasn't in control. Paul swallowed hard. Look, man, get out, I said, my voice like steel. He hesitated only for a second before turning and walking out without another word. Rachel stood there, still frozen, still unable to process the fact that her world had just collapsed. I turned to the staff, my voice steady. If anyone has a problem working here after seeing this, I understand. But I want you to know that moving forward, I refuse to tolerate this kind of disrespect. My business is built on trust, and trust is something that won't be broken again. Some nodded. Some just stood in stunned silence. Rachel, however, finally snapped back in emotion, reaching for my arm. Ethan, please, she whispered. Let's go home. We need to talk. I pulled my arm away, my expression cold. I already packed your bags. Her breath caught. They're outside, I continued. You're not coming home. You can go to Paul. He's your family now. A choked sob escaped her lips. No, Ethan, you don't mean that. I stared at her for a long moment. Then, with complete certainty, I said, yes, I do. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, broken, as the full weight of her choices came crashing down. And for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing but freedom. I drove home alone, the silence in the car pressing down on me like a weight. The restaurant had been left in stunned quiet after I walked out, Rachel's sobs still echoing in my ears. But I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel regret. I felt like a man who had finally put an end to his own humiliation. When I pulled into the driveway, her bags were still sitting outside, just where I had left them. A half-packed suitcase, a duffel bag, and a few of her personal things stacked neatly by the door. Rachel wasn't there yet, but I knew she would be soon. I had barely stepped inside when I heard the frantic screech of tires pulling up outside. A second later, the pounding on the door started. Ethan, open the door. I took a slow breath, steeling myself. Then, calmly, I unlocked it and pulled it open. Rachel stood there, her face blotchy from crying, her hair disheveled. She had probably driven straight from the restaurant, barely stopping to process what had happened. Her eyes darted to the bags, then back to me. You're serious? She whispered. I leaned against the doorframe. Completely. Her lip trembled. You can't just throw me out. I let out a humorless chuckle. You threw yourself out? Rachel. The second you decided to sneak around with Paul, the second you brought it into my business, into my office, you ended this marriage. Not me. She shook her head violently. No, Ethan, please. We can fix this. I messed up. I know I did, but I love you. I stared at her, feeling nothing but exhaustion. No, you don't. You love the security I gave you. You loved knowing I'd always be there, no matter how much you disrespected me. I gestured to her bags. Go to Paul. You wanted him so badly? Now he's all you've got. She let out a broken sob. I don't want him. I never wanted him, Ethan. It was stupid. It was just a mistake. I cut in, my voice like ice. That's what you're about to say, isn't it? She blinked, guilt flashing in her eyes. Yes, she admitted weakly. I laughed, shaking my head. Rachel, a mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. What you did, that was a choice. Over and over again. You don't just accidentally sleep with someone in your husband's office. Her shoulders trembled, her hands shaking at her sides. Please, just let me come inside so we can talk. I stepped back, gripping the edge of the door. No, you don't live here anymore. The reality of it seemed to finally hit her. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She wiped at her face furiously, her breathing uneven. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered. I met her gaze, my voice steady. Not my problem. A bitter, desperate laugh escaped her lips. Wow, you really hate me. I didn't answer right away. Did I? Hate wasn't the right word. I didn't have the energy for hatred. Hatred meant I still cared, that I was still emotionally invested. But I wasn't. I had given Rachel my best years, and she had spent them chipping away at me piece by piece until there was nothing left. I finally spoke, my voice quiet. No, Rachel, I don't hate you, but I'm done caring about you. She made a sound like she had been struck. For the first time in her life, Rachel had lost control. She had spent so long treating me like a backup plan, like I was someone she could manipulate into forgiving her. But now she saw the truth. She had nothing left here. She turned abruptly, grabbing her suitcase with shaking hands. She struggled with it for a second, fumbling with the zipper, before finally yanking it up onto her shoulder. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice breaking. You'll regret this, Ethan. You'll see. I watched as she walked toward her car, her movements sluggish, as if her body was finally feeling the weight of what she had done. She opened the door, but before getting in, she looked at me one last time. I was your wife, she whispered, as if that alone should be enough to make me change my mind. I exhaled, feeling a deep, settled calm in my chest. Not anymore. She let out a broken sound, shaking her head before slipping into the driver's seat. A moment later, she started the engine and drove off, her taillights disappearing down the street. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where she had been. Then, without another word, I turned back inside and locked the door. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was free. The house was silent. A different kind of silence. Not the tense, suffocating kind I had grown used to, the one that came from Rachel's cold stares or dismissive sighs. This was peaceful. It was the silence of a place that no longer held a traitor. A house that had been scrubbed clean of her presence, leaving only the man who had built it in the first place. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the spot where Rachel had stood just hours ago, her tear-streaked face begging for another chance. I had expected to feel something, regret, sadness, maybe even guilt, but all I felt was relief. A deep, satisfying relief that settled into my bones like the first breath of fresh air after being underwater for too long. I walked upstairs and into my bedroom. The closet door was open, the empty spaces where Rachel's clothes used to be making the room look bigger. It was strange. Just a few days ago, I had dreaded this moment, dreaded the idea of coming home to an empty bed, to a house missing the presence of a woman I had once loved. But now, it felt like I had reclaimed something that had been stolen from me. I grabbed a trash bag from the hallway closet and started walking through the room, tossing in anything that still smelled like her. Half-used perfume bottles, a hairbrush, a pair of heels she had left under the dresser. When I reached the nightstand, I hesitated. There was a framed photo of us from years ago, back when things were simple, back when I actually believed in us. We were laughing in the picture, standing outside the restaurant the day it first opened, full of hope for the future. I stared at it for a long moment before tossing it into the bag. That man in the picture? He was gone, and I had no interest in bringing him back. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, feeling lighter. No more Rachel. No more waiting for the next insult, disguised as a joke. No more wondering if I was being paranoid. I got dressed, drank my coffee in silence, and drove straight to my lawyer's office. Mark looked up when I walked in, already knowing why I was there. I assume she's out. She's out, I confirmed, taking a seat across from him. I want the divorce papers sent to her today. He nodded, flipping open a folder. She's not going to take this lying down. She'll try to fight for money, for a stake in the restaurant. I lean back, my voice steady. She gets nothing. I already made sure her name isn't on anything tied to the business. Mark smirked. Good. That makes this easier. He slid the papers toward me, handing me a pen. Sign these, and we'll get them served by the end of the day. I didn't hesitate. I signed every page, the scratch of the pen against paper feeling like the final nail in the coffin of a marriage that had died long before I had caught her cheating. As I stood to leave, Mark gave me a knowing look. You did the right thing, Ethan. I nodded. Yeah, I know. That afternoon, I walked into the restaurant like a man who had shed his chains. The staff was quiet when they saw me, waiting to see if there would be some dramatic fallout from this morning's events. Mason was behind the bar, wiping down glasses, glancing up at me with cautious curiosity. Everything good? He asked. I nodded. Rachel's gone. A few of the servers exchanged looks, whispering to each other. It wasn't surprising. Everyone had seen the security footage, had witnessed Rachel's betrayal firsthand. Mason set down the glass he was holding. So what happens now? I took a slow breath, looking around at the restaurant I had built, the place that had nearly been tainted by her lies. Now we move forward. That evening, as I was locking up, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. Ethan, please. Let's talk. Just one last time. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Rachel was grasping at straws now, trying to find any sliver of control she could hold on to. I could have ignored it, could have deleted the message and moved on. But something in me wanted to shut this down for good. I sent a single reply. There's nothing left to say. Then I blocked her number, tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, and drove home. I wasn't her husband anymore, and I had never been more at peace. The divorce papers were served the next morning. I got the call from Mark while I was at the restaurant, standing in the back office, the same office where Rachel had thrown away our marriage. She didn't take it well. Mark said, his tone flat. She called my office twice, demanded a meeting. I told her there's nothing to discuss. I could picture it in my head. Rachel sitting there, phone in hand, desperately trying to find a way to turn this around. But there was nothing left for her to twist. No way for her to manipulate the truth into something more palatable. The footage had already done that for me. She's going to fight for money, I said, though it wasn't a question. Of course, Mark replied. She's already asked about spousal support. Tried to claim she was instrumental to the restaurant's success. He scoffed. I reminded her that she was never on payroll, never contributed financially, and was actually fired, on camera, for having an affair with an employee. I smirked. And how did she take that? She hung up on me. That was the difference between us. Rachel had spent our marriage using words as weapons, cutting me down with a well-placed insult or a carefully crafted laugh at my expense. But now, words wouldn't save her. Fact would, and the facts weren't in her favor. That night, I got home later than usual, but this time, there was no one waiting for me. No Rachel, no forced conversation about her day, no passive-aggressive sighs if I didn't respond fast enough. Just silence. But I welcomed it. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in, letting the quiet wash over me. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and leaned against the counter, staring out the window. For the first time in years, I wasn't stressed about what I was coming home to. I wasn't bracing myself for another argument, another jab, disguised as a joke. I was finally alone, but in the best way possible. The next few weeks moved fast. Rachel did exactly what I expected. She tried to stall the divorce, hoping I'd reconsider. She sent emails, messages through Mark's office, even had mutual friends reach out. But I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Then, when stalling didn't work, she tried to make me the villain. I started hearing whispers through the grapevine, Rachel telling people I had blindsided her with a divorce, that I had given up on our marriage too easily. She's telling people you were too focused on work, Mason told me one night after the dinner rush. That she only got close to Paul because you were never around. I let out a humorless chuckle. Right, because I was too busy running the business that paid for her entire lifestyle. Mason shrugged. You know how people like her work. She's not looking for the truth, just sympathy. He was right. Rachel had lost everything in the span of a few weeks. Her cushy life, the financial safety net I had provided, the reputation she had built as the charming, likable wife of a successful restaurant owner. Now, all she had was Paul, and I had a feeling that wouldn't last long either. Then, one afternoon, I got the call. Mark's voice was smug when he spoke. She signed the papers. I sat back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. She didn't fight it. Oh, she tried. But in the end, she had no leverage. You had proof of the affair, no shared assets, and she was unemployed. The judge saw right through her. He paused. She gets nothing, Ethan. Not a dime. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I doubted the outcome, but because it meant this was really over. No more legal battles. No more arguments. No more Rachel. Just freedom. I hung up the phone, grabbed my jacket, and walked outside. The evening air was cool, crisp. I stood there for a moment, staring up at the sky, breathing in the weightlessness of it all. Then, for the first time since this all started, I smiled. I had won. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.